The reef knot, or square knot as most people call it, is a very typical used knot. In fact, it's so commonly used that it's actually rather misused. Unfortunately, anytime you tie any type of knot in a piece of rope, you reduce its breaking strength. The reef knot has been known to reduce cordage to up to 50% breaking strength, so that's pretty big loss just by putting a simple knot in a piece of rope, and something you would absolutely not want to use for climbing or any heavy working loads. It's usually used more for, small string or cordage and doing whipping on the end to keep the ends from fraying, or securing packages, or jug bottle sling type setup. So it's not really meant for heavy extreme use, yet because it's so commonly known and so commonly used, it ends up being used and abused way too much. But anyway, it's a good knot to know, so let's go ahead and take a look at it. Tying it's very simple. In fact, I'm sure most of you might be familiar with this. It's very easy. Take what's in your left hand, go left over right. Now it's in your right hand, right over left. This will make it so that the opposing lines come out on the same side of the opposing loops. Now, even though this appears to be a quite nice, easy knot, and it is, it definitely has its distinct disadvantages. For instance, if you don't do the left over right correctly, you can end up with what's called a granny knot. That's just more of a typical standard stopper knot, and that also reduces the breaking strength quite a bit. But it has a downfall, is that when there's, depending on how much load is or is not on the line, these can actually just push apart. Now granted, this wasn't tied very tight. That's just, I don't know, somewhat, not as hard as I can pull, but just a good stout tug. Seems fairly secure, but again, didn't take much. If it was windy out, or if you had this connected to a tarp and it was getting wind and blowing around, that could just come undone, work itself free. I've seen it happen many times, and of course, a lot of times this breaks right at the knot, and so that's just something you want to avoid. But again, let's take a look. Left over right. Right over left. Making sure your ends come out on the same side. And so that is a typical reef or square knot. Turns out we tie this knot every day when we tie our shoes, except by that name it goes by a twin draw loop reef or square knot. And well, you've tied your shoes before, left over right. Grab your bow, your bite, and pull the loops through. Now if I were just to continue to pull each end through, you end up with a square knot. So you can see, you've actually been tying that every day of your life. One final way to help secure this from coming apart is to just do a half hitch with the rest of your tag end on each side. So it's just go around the top of the line and then come back under itself. And you can just do that on each side. And that would help keep it from coming apart if it was windy outside, if you had to connect it to a tarp, or say you're towing something through water in the waves and it's constantly getting pressure and not, and releasing. But again, not really the best knot to know, or to use rather. Good to know, not really the best to use. That is your standard reef or square knot. Let's take a look at the reef knot with some larger line. Again, left over right, right over left. This might give you a better view of how you want to make sure to have the same end come out of the same part of the loop. Both of these are going down to the bottom, both of these are coming out of the top. So you can see, as with larger line, this knot is even worse because it doesn't tighten down over itself properly. The thickness and diameter of the rope, probably can't see that on camera. I don't know if you can see down through it. A hole of light right there. that actually prevents it from tightening. See, this is, I got that pretty darn tight, and there's still a gap down in there. So that may or may not prevent it from doing its job. Most likely it will. It's also now squeezing on the jacket of the cord pretty good. So that's also one of the reasons why it reduces the breaking strength so much. So as you can see, the square knot is a great joining knot for very simple things and for things that don't have a very heavy working load. For instance, again, you would never want to use this for climbing or any kind of, rigging or support system or anything of that sort. This is meant for simple tasks with very low working loads. But again, a good knot to know.